Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Excited for today's topic. We're diving headfirst into the world of sovereign wealth funds. You know, these massive investment funds controlled by governments. We're talking serious money here. Nearly $13 trillion globally.
Yeah, a 13 with 12 zeros after it.
That's mind-boggling, and it's not just abstract numbers. These funds have a real impact on the global economy. They're investing in everything from infrastructure to technology to renewable energy.
They're shaping the future, that's for sure.
And get this, even former President Trump floated the idea of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, said it could fund infrastructure projects and even pay down the national debt.
Yeah, that proposal definitely raised some eyebrows.
It sure did. And it sparked a ton of questions like what exactly are these funds, how do they work, and could the U.S. model even be feasible?
All great questions.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a sovereign wealth fund?
Well, the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute defines an SWF as a government-owned investment fund. They're usually funded by a country's surplus revenues. Think oil profits, trade surpluses, even foreign currency reserves.
So basically it's a government's piggy bank.
In a way, yeah. But it's more than just saving for a rainy day. The goals can be quite diverse. Protecting the economy from shocks, investing strategically for long-term growth, or a combination of both.
So it's not just about hoarding cash. Some countries are using these funds to actively shape their economic future.
Exactly.
Now, I'm curious about the major players in this game. Which countries are the heavy hitters in the SWF world?
Well, some of the biggest names you'll hear are Norway, China, and Abu Dhabi, each managing trillions of dollars.
Wow, that's some serious financial firepower. But I imagine not all SWFs are created equal. I mean, they probably have different strategies depending on their goals, right?
Absolutely, you're spot on. There are actually distinct types of SWFs, each with its own focus.
Okay, so let's break those down.
Let's start with savings funds. These are primarily focused on investing for future generations.
Makes sense, especially for countries with resources like oil. They can invest those profits now to benefit people decades down the line.
Exactly. The Kuwait Investment Authority is a perfect example. It's the world's oldest SWF, created in 1953 to manage Kuwait's oil wealth.
So it's like a massive national savings account, building a financial cushion for the future.
Precisely.
Now, what about countries facing more immediate economic challenges? Do SWFs play a role there?
Absolutely. Stabilization funds are designed to help countries with volatile economies, particularly those reliant on exports like oil or minerals.
So if prices drop suddenly, the fund acts as a safety net, helping to prevent a major economic downturn.
Exactly. Think of it like a shock absorber for the economy. Several oil-producing nations have used these funds successfully.
I see.
For instance, during the 2008 financial crisis, countries like Chile and Russia tapped into their stabilization funds to lessen the impact of plummeting commodity prices.
So they were able to weather the storm a bit better.
Exactly. It helped them maintain essential government services and support their economies through a turbulent period.
That's fascinating. It's like having a financial safety net woven into the fabric of the nation's economy. But what about countries that are looking to use their SWFs more aggressively? I imagine some nations aren't content with just saving or stabilizing, right?
You're right again. Some SWFs are designed to play a more active role in driving economic growth. These are known as strategic funds.
Okay, so they're not just passive investors. They're looking to make strategic bets that will boost their economies.
Precisely. A prime example is Temasek Holdings, owned by the government of Singapore.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them. They invest in a wide range of companies and industries, both domestically and internationally.
Yes, and they do it very strategically. They aren't just chasing the highest returns. They're looking for investments that align with Singapore's long-term economic goals.
So they're playing the long game, trying to position Singapore for success in the decades to come.
Exactly. For example, Temasek has made significant investments in biotechnology, renewable energy, and even artificial intelligence.
Wow, that's forward thinking.
They are actively shaping the future of Singapore's economy by investing in key sectors.
That's really impressive. Now, are there any countries that combine elements of all these different SWF types?
Yes, there are. China's SWF is a good example of what we call a multi-objective fund.
So they're doing a bit of everything.
Exactly. They're aiming to save for the future, stabilize the present, and strategically invest for long-term growth.
Ambitious.
Very much so. They're one of the world's largest and most active SWFs.
China's economic rise over the past few decades has been remarkable, and their SWF is undoubtedly playing a key role in that, investing in strategic sectors and expanding their global influence. But all this talk of massive funds and global influence makes me wonder, Are there concerns about these SWFs? Having governments control so much money has to raise some questions, right?
You've hit on an important point. There are concerns about the potential for political influence in SWF decision-making.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, could an SWF be used to pressure a country into a certain policy decision? By threatening to withdraw investments, for example?
That's a scenario that some critics worry about. And there have been instances that fueled these concerns. For example, remember the 2009 bond deal between China and Costa Rica?
Refresh my memory.
China offered to purchase a large amount of Costa Rican bonds at a time when the country was facing financial difficulties. However, this offer came with a condition. Costa Rica had to switch its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China.
Ah, yes, I remember that now. That sparked a lot of debate.
It sure did. It raised questions about whether China was using its financial power to influence a sovereign nation's foreign policy.
That's a pretty stark example of how an SWF could be used as a tool for political leverage. But I imagine there's another side to this story. Not all SWFs operate this way, right?
Of course not. Many SWFs, especially those focused on savings and stabilization, function similarly to other institutional investors, like pension funds or university endowments.
So they're just trying to maximize returns like any other investor.
Exactly. They aim for maximum returns and often act as passive investors, much like firms like Blackstone or UBS.
So it's not a black and white situation. There are different types of SWFs with different motivations and approaches, but the potential for conflicts of interest is definitely there, and that's something to be mindful of.
Absolutely. It's important to recognize that diversity within the SWF landscape and to be aware of the potential for both responsible and less than transparent behavior.
So how is the global community responding to these concerns? Are there any efforts to ensure SWFs are operating responsibly and transparently?
Yes, there are. Organizations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, are actively promoting best practices and greater transparency in the SWF world.
Okay, that's good to hear. What are some of the guidelines they're advocating?
They're encouraging SWFs to clarify their investment objectives, disclose more information about their holdings and activities, and establish clear governance structures that minimize the risk of political interference.
So basically, they're trying to create a rule book for SWFs.
In a sense, yeah. They're aiming to build confidence and address anxieties about potential conflicts of interest. They're trying to ensure a level playing field.
Yeah.
And prevent the misuse of these powerful financial instruments.
It sounds like they're trying to establish a set of ground rules to keep things fair and transparent. Now let's loop back to former President Trump's proposal for a U.S. sovereign wealth fund.
Ah, yes. The idea that sparked a whirlwind of debate.
Yeah, a lot of people were scratching their heads about that one.
Understandably so. It's not entirely unprecedented, though.
Wait, really? I thought the U.S. was a latecomer to the SWF scene.
Well, on a federal level, yes. However, did you know that several U.S. states already have their own versions of sovereign wealth funds?
That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yep. States like Alaska, Texas, and New Mexico, they've established funds primarily funded by oil, gas, and mineral resource revenues.
So they're using their natural resources to build wealth for the future.
Exactly. They've used these funds to invest in various projects, ranging from infrastructure to education, aiming to benefit their citizens and diversify their economies.
So in a way, these state-level funds are like mini SWFs, demonstrating that the concept can work in the U.S. context.
Right.
But scaling it up to a national level would be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. A U.S. SWF operating on a national scale would involve trillions of dollars, making it a vastly more complex undertaking.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We know what SWFs are, the different types, the major players, and the potential benefits and risks they present. But the big question remains, could a U.S. sovereign wealth fund actually work? And what are the implications of such a massive undertaking?
That's what we'll delve into next.
All right, so a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. A pretty bold idea, but where would the money even come from? The U.S. isn't exactly swimming in surplus cash, is it?
Yeah, the trillion-dollar question, literally. Former President Trump's proposal was a little vague on that front. Some folks have suggested using revenue from energy production, like oil and gas, to seed the fund.
That makes sense, at least on the surface. But wouldn't that clash with the push for renewable energy?
Oh, absolutely. It would definitely be a point of contention. Others have suggested using government budget surpluses, but those are pretty rare these days.
Yeah, not exactly a reliable source of funding.
Right. Finding a politically viable and financially sustainable funding source would be the first major hurdle.
Okay, let's say, hypothetically, we clear that hurdle. The money's there. What about the structure and governance of the fund? How do we ensure that a U.S. SWF managing trillions of dollars operates with transparency and accountability?
That's crucial, no doubt about it. A robust governance structure would be absolutely essential, especially given the concerns about political influence we talked about earlier.
Yeah, imagine the potential for disaster if investment decisions were driven by political motivations instead of, sound financial principles.
Exactly. It can't become a tool for partisan agendas or political favors.
It would be a recipe for disaster.
To prevent that, we'd need a carefully crafted system of checks and balances, a board of directors with serious expertise in finance and investment, not just political appointees.
Right. We need people who know what they're doing and who can resist political pressure.
Precisely. And of course, transparency would be paramount. Regular, detailed reporting on the fund's investments, performance, and strategy.
Openness is key for sure, especially when you're dealing with public funds on this scale.
Absolutely. It would build public trust
Yeah.
and demonstrate that the fund is operating in the best interests of the nation.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the potential benefits of a U.S. SWF. Why are so many countries embracing this model? What could a well-managed U.S. SWF actually achieve?
Well, proponents argue that it could generate significant long-term revenue for the government. Those returns could be used for all sorts of things: funding infrastructure projects, reducing the national debt, supporting social programs.
It sounds like a potential win-win.
It could be. It could provide a significant financial cushion, helping to stabilize the economy and navigate future uncertainties.
That's pretty appealing, especially considering how unpredictable the global economy can be.
Exactly. And beyond the purely financial returns, there's also the potential for a U.S. SWF to play a strategic role in promoting American interests globally.
Okay, now how would that work? Are we talking about using investments to influence policy decisions
Yeah.
or forge alliances with other countries?
Well, it could be a tool for soft power diplomacy. For instance, the U.S. could invest in key industries in developing nations, partner on mutually beneficial projects, or use its financial leverage to promote stability and growth in strategically important regions.
So it's about using economic clout to further U.S. interests.
In a sense, yes.
But wouldn't that raise concerns about overreach or undue influence?
Of course, it's a valid concern. Any use of an SWF for strategic purposes would require careful consideration and transparency.
It's a delicate balance. We don't want to be seen as bullies.
Exactly. It's crucial to ensure that these actions align with American values and don't cross any ethical or legal lines.
Right. We don't want to undermine our credibility or damage our reputation on the global stage.
Precisely.
All right. So we've talked about potential benefits, but we also need to address the potential downsides, right?
Absolutely. A U.S. SWF is not a magic solution, and there are some very real risks to consider.
Okay, lay it on me. What are the potential pitfalls?
Well, the most obvious risk is mismanagement. If the fund isn't run effectively and transparently, it could lose money, potentially putting taxpayer dollars at risk.
Yeah, that would be a major setback.
It would be a national embarrassment.
We'd need a top-notch team running the show.
Absolutely. People with a proven track record of success.
But even with the best team in place, aren't there inherent risks with any investment strategy? I mean, markets can be volatile, and unexpected events can happen.
You're right. No investment is entirely risk-free. And an SWF would be no exception.
And then there's the political interference issue we touched on earlier.
Right.
Even with safeguards in place, wouldn't a U.S. SWF be a constant target for political pressure? Especially with trillions of dollars at stake.
It would be a tempting target, no doubt. Maintaining the fund's independence and resisting political meddling would require a constant effort.
It would be a battle to protect the fund's integrity.
Exactly. And ensure that it serves the nation's long-term interests, rather than short-term political agendas.
And beyond domestic concerns, wouldn't a U.S. SWF also face scrutiny on the international stage?
Oh, most definitely. Some countries might view it with suspicion. They might see it as a tool for American economic dominance, or an attempt to exert undue influence.
It could create some geopolitical tension.
It could even spark a financial arms race.
So it's a double-edged sword. A U.S. SWF could generate benefits, but it could also backfire, creating friction and undermining America's global standing.
Exactly. Transparency and diplomacy would be essential to manage international perceptions and build confidence in the fund's objectives.
A high-stakes game, that's for sure.
No doubt about it.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the potential benefits of a U.S. SWF, but we've also highlighted the very real risks.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Well said. Now, let's shift our focus to the global implications of SWFs and how they're shaping the financial landscape. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the U.S. and this hypothetical U.S. sovereign wealth fund, but let's zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture. These funds are already out there, major players on the global stage, and their influence is only growing. So what kind of impact are they having on the world economy?
Well, it's a complex question, but I think it's safe to say that SWFs are reshaping the financial landscape in some pretty profound ways.
How so?
Their sheer size and their long-term investment horizons give them a lot of clout. They're impacting everything from currency markets to infrastructure development, even the global balance of power.
So we're not just talking about, abstract financial concepts.
Not at all. These funds are having a real-world impact.
Give me an example.
Well, look at renewable energy. SWFs have become major investors in renewable energy projects around the world. Norway's SWF, for instance, has invested heavily in solar and wind farms.
So they're putting their money where their mouth is?
Exactly. And these investments are not only generating financial returns, they're also helping to accelerate the transition to a cleaner energy future.
So in that sense, they can be a force for good.
Right. Using their financial power to address global challenges.
But I imagine there are also concerns about the downsides.
Right, of course. Some critics worry that SWFs could be used to advance a particular country's geopolitical agenda, potentially at the expense of other nations.
So there's a need for transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. The international community is working on that, developing guidelines and best practices for SWFs.
It's about striking the right balance.
Right, between maximizing returns and upholding global norms and standards.
And this is a global conversation, right? It's not just about the U.S.
Exactly. The decisions made about SWFs, whether in the U.S. or elsewhere, have global implications.
All right, so let's wrap this up, bring it back to our listeners. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into sovereign wealth funds?
Well, first and foremost, remember that SWFs are major players in the global economy, and their influence is only going to grow. They come in different forms, with different objectives and strategies, but they all share one thing in common. They manage vast sums of public money for long-term gain.
And as we've discussed, they have the potential to generate significant financial returns, contribute to economic stability. But there are also concerns about transparency, political influence, and unintended consequences.
It's a topic that requires careful consideration, nuance,
Yeah.
and a recognition that there are no easy answers.
So as you follow the news, engage in conversations about economics and global affairs, keep SWFs in mind. They're going to be increasingly influential in the years to come.
Stay informed, engage critically, and form your own opinions.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
The more you understand about these complex financial instruments, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the world.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today.
It's been a great discussion. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of sovereign wealth funds. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those minds sharp.